The evening air was thick with the scent of freshly cut roses, mingling with the soft clink of champagne flutes. Amelia floated effortlessly from one guest to another, her laughter melodic, her smile unwavering. She was the perfect hostess, engaging, charming, and stunning in a silk emerald green gown that draped elegantly over her figure. Beside her, David beamed with pride. This celebration was for him a victory party to mark his latest triumph in court. A case that had dominated the headlines and solidified his reputation as one of the most formidable attorneys in the city. Their home, a sprawling colonial masterpiece with meticulously groomed lawns and stately pillars, buzzed with conversation and praise. Everyone wanted a word with David, to shake his hand, to commend him for his brilliance. And Amelia, like a perfectly polished jewel, played her role as the supportive wife. She poured drinks, offered knowing smiles, and nodded graciously as guests gushed over her husband's skill and tenacity. But beneath her flawless facade, Amelia's mind wandered. She scanned the room, her eyes instinctively finding Ethan. He stood near the grand piano, a drink in hand, the flicker of a smile playing at the corner of his lips. A wave of heat rose to her cheeks as their gazes met, a moment stretched taut, charged with unspoken history. She quickly turned away, focusing on a guest's question about David's next big case. But the damage was done. Her heart raced, a mixture of shame and longing. Hours passed and guests slowly trickled out, leaving behind empty glasses and echoes of laughter. David, visibly exhausted but still buoyant from the evening's praise, kissed Amelia on the forehead. "I couldn't have done this without you," he murmured, the sincerity in his voice cutting through her like glass. She managed to smile and said all the right things. He didn't notice the tightness around her eyes, the way she flinched at his touch. That night, after David fell into a deep sleep, Amelia sat alone in the living room. The remnants of their party surrounded her, half-eaten hors d'oeuvres weavers, abandoned napkins bearing their monogrammed initials, and the ghost of conversations about a life she was no longer sure she wanted. Ethan's presence lingered like a phantom, making her skin prickle. She hated herself for it, for the thrill she couldn't shake, for the deceit she had already begun to weave. The affair had started innocently enough. A lingering lunch that turned into a series of after-work drinks. Ethan was magnetic in ways David was not, spontaneous, reckless, and just out of reach. He listened when Amelia spoke, laughed at her jokes, and most dangerously of all, made her feel seen. At first, it was the emotional escape she craved, but lines blurred quickly, and soon secrecy and passion became the only things that felt real. Yet for every stolen moment, guilt gnawed at her. She would return home and find David buried in case files or waiting up with dinner he barely had time to cook. He was steadfast, devoted, the man she had promised to love in sickness and in health. There were nights, she almost confessed, sickened by her own duplicity. But the fear of ruining everything, of destroying the illusion of their life, kept her silent. And then, one rainy Thursday morning, everything changed. The strip turned pink. Amelia stared at it, her heart pounding, dread pooling in her stomach. She was pregnant. The realization sent her reeling, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and fears. She hadn't even seen Ethan in weeks, their fling abruptly cooled by her attempts to refocus on her marriage. But now there was no way to ignore what they'd done. David, for his part, was ecstatic. "I'm going to be a dad," he repeated over and over, wonder in his voice. He immediately scaled back his workload, making space in his life for fatherhood. He decorated the nursery himself, cream walls with hints of gold, a crib made of cherry wood, shelves already filled with books. At every doctor's appointment, he was the doting husband, never leaving Amelia's side. Amelia played her role with precision. She allowed herself to believe for fleeting moments that this was real, that the life growing inside her was David's, that her transgressions were distant, fading memories. But the closer they came to the baby's arrival, the harder it was to maintain the charade. She would wake in cold sweats, haunted by thoughts of the truth emerging. If Ethan was the father, it would destroy everything. As the months passed, Amelia buried her anxiety beneath layers of forced smiles and carefully rehearsed reassurances. She told herself that the baby would be David's, it had to be. Life continued. The days a blur of nursery preparations, baby showers, and long, whispered promises between her and David about their new future. But doubt was a specter that refused to be banished. The birth was long and grueling. David was by her side every second, holding her hand, whispering words of encouragement. When their son arrived, crying and pink-faced, David wept openly. In those moments, Amelia let herself hope desperately that this chapter of deception could be closed, that their life could be rebuilt from the ashes of her mistakes. But within days, David's demeanor changed. At first, it was imperceptible questions about family resemblances, casual comments about the baby's features. Then, more probing, intense silence whenever someone remarked on how little the baby looked like him. One night, after Amelia had put the baby to bed, David broached the subject. His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with something close to fear. "Amelia," he said, "I want a paternity test." Time seemed to stop. Amelia tried to stall, to reason with him, but David's resolve was unshakable. She agreed, her heart hammering in her chest. The wait for the results was excruciating, each day heavier than the last. When the envelope finally arrived, David opened it in front of her, his face a mask of cold detachment. As he read the words confirming what he'd suspected, something inside him broke. "You lied to me," he said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. Everything was a lie. Amelia fell to her knees, sobbing, pleading for him to understand. She talked of loneliness, of feeling abandoned, of trying to find anything that made her feel alive again. But David didn't waver. "You made your choices," he said, his voice cold. "You and your affair. I want nothing to do with the child. He isn't mine." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. David packed a bag that night, his movements mechanical. The divorce papers arrived within a week. True to his reputation, David wielded the legal system with merciless precision. He stripped Amelia of everything: the house, their assets, even financial support. She was left with nothing but the hollow echo of her own choices. Word spread quickly among their social circles. Amelia became a pariah, whispered about in hushed tones. Invitations dried up, friends disappeared. She reached out to Ethan, but he wanted nothing to do with her now that the truth had surfaced. Alone and disgraced, Amelia faced the consequences of her betrayal, every step a reminder of the price she paid for one reckless affair. David, meanwhile, began to rebuild. He focused on work, on rediscovering himself beyond the ruins of their marriage. The scars remained, but each day brought a measure of healing. He shut out any thoughts of the child he once believed to be his, casting aside the past that had nearly destroyed him. For Amelia, there was no such clean break. She was forced to confront the shattered remains of her choices and seek redemption, if such a thing were even possible. But one truth lingered above all: some betrayals never truly heal, and some consequences can never be undone. The days following David's departure were a suffocating blur for Amelia. The weight of what she had done, the affair, the lies, the child who now symbolized both her greatest mistake and her deepest regret, pressed down on her with unrelenting force. The house that had once been a haven of security and luxury now felt like a prison, every corner haunted by echoes of the life she had destroyed. David's absence was absolute. His silence was as deafening as his words had been on that last night. There would be no reconciliation, no mercy. He wanted nothing to do with her or the child she'd brought into the world. And so Amelia was left alone to shoulder the burden of her actions, facing a future she had never imagined. The legal proceedings were swift and brutal. David's lawyer, acting with the same ruthless precision David had shown in courtrooms for years, ensured that Amelia left with nothing. She watched helplessly as everything she had once thought of as hers was stripped away. The house, the savings, every shred of financial security, all gone. When the ruling was finalized, she packed her few remaining belongings into a single suitcase and walked out of the home she'd shared with David, her son clinging to her side. The descent into public disgrace was swift. Whispers followed her wherever she went. Friends she once considered close turned their backs, their eyes full of judgment and pity. Amelia became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what betrayal could cost. When she tried to reach out to Ethan, desperate for some semblance of support, she found nothing but cold indifference. "It's over," Amelia, Ethan said, his voice as detached as his gaze. "I have a family, a life. I'm not going to be dragged down by your mess." Amelia's pleas fell on deaf ears. He turned his back on her, disappearing from her life as quickly as he had entered it. With nowhere left to turn, she found herself standing on the doorstep of a run-down apartment building, her son in her arms. The peeling paint and sagging steps were a far cry from the life she had known. But it was all she could afford. The first few weeks were the hardest. Money was scarce, and every day was a struggle to provide for her son. Amelia found work as a clerk at a small store, the hours long and the pay meager. She walked to work each day, rain or shine, her child bundled in a worn stroller. The whispers never fully went away: customers and co-workers who recognized her story, who saw her as nothing more than the cheating wife who had fallen from grace. She learned to ignore them, focusing instead on the tasks at hand. Each day was an exercise in survival. Night after night, she sat alone in the dim light of her apartment, staring at bills she could barely afford to pay. The baby's cries pierced the silence, a relentless reminder of the life she had brought into this world, a life that, despite everything, she loved fiercely. She would hold him close, whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. "I'll make it right," she would say, her voice trembling. "I'll be better for you." Over time, the raw edges of her pain dulled, replaced by a relentless determination. She threw herself into her work, saving every penny she could. Parenting classes became her lifeline, each lesson a step toward proving to herself, to the world, that she could be more than her mistakes. Slowly, her living conditions improved. She moved into a slightly better apartment, one with bright yellow walls that she painted herself. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. David remained a ghost in her life. He made good on his promise to have nothing to do with the child. Custody wasn't even a question. He had relinquished all rights and responsibilities, leaving Amelia to navigate parenthood alone. But his absence didn't mean he had faded from her thoughts. She saw him sometimes in passing on television and newspapers, in the rare moments when their paths crossed at public events. He looked colder now, harder. She wondered if he ever thought of her, if he ever regretted the life they had lost. But those thoughts were fleeting. She couldn't afford to dwell on the past. One rainy evening, as she walked home from work, Amelia stopped at the park. Her son, now a toddler, giggled as he splashed in puddles, his small boots kicking up water. She watched him, tears stinging her eyes. This child, born of betrayal, was her everything. He deserved better than the life she had given him. And so, she vowed to keep fighting for him, for herself. Seasons changed. The whispers grew quieter, replaced by nods of recognition from neighbors who saw her working tirelessly to provide for her son. Amelia found pride in the small victories: a paid bill, a new toy, a warm meal. She had lost everything, but she was still standing. One day, as she was sorting through old belongings, she found a photograph buried at the bottom of a box. It was of her and David, taken years ago. They were smiling, their arms around each other, oblivious to the storm that would one day tear them apart. She traced the outline of his face with her finger, grief washing over her. So much had been lost. So much had been destroyed. But as she placed the photograph back in the box, Amelia knew she couldn't change the past. All she could do was keep moving forward. She would build a new life from the ashes of the old one, a life built on honesty, on hard work, on love for the child who gave her a reason to keep going. For David, the scars of betrayal would never fully heal. He had rebuilt his life, but the pain lingered, a reminder of what had been taken from him. He kept his distance, refusing to let the past consume him. Yet, in quiet moments, he couldn't help but wonder if things could have been different. For Amelia, there would be no redemption, no grand reconciliation. Only the daily struggle to be better for herself, for her son. Some betrayals were too great to overcome, and some consequences could never be undone. But as she held her son close, she knew that even in the shadow of her mistakes, there was still hope. And that was enough.